The mop water turned black and began whispering. I was alone in the store the way I always was after closing, when the mop water changed. Closing hours had a smell all their own. Sharp disinfectant layered over old coffee, sugar, and the faint metallic tang of the freezers. I'd locked the front doors an hour earlier, flipped the sign to closed, and pulled the metal grate halfway down so the parking lot lights bled in through the glass in pale stripes. The store felt smaller at night, compressed by shadow. The aisles stretched longer, narrower, the shelves leaning inward as if listening. The overhead lights flickered in their usual tired rhythm, buzzing softly before each blink. I'd learned the pattern well enough to move with it, pushing the mop across the tile in slow, even strokes. The mop head dragged wetly, fibers rough against the floor, leaving behind a dull sheen that caught the light and reflected it back in warped fragments. The bucket sat near the counter, yellow plastic scarred from years of use. The water inside was cloudy with gray streaks. Dust, spilled soda, whatever the day had ground into the floor. I dunked the mop, wrung it out, and went back to work, the hum of the freezers keeping me company. That was when I noticed the color. At first, it was subtle, the way shadows pool in corners when you're not looking directly at them. The water in the bucket darkened around the mop head, gray deepening into something thicker, heavier. I paused, staring down at it, my reflection wobbling on the surface. The water swallowed the overhead light instead of reflecting it, turning opaque, like ink spreading through paper. "Great," I muttered, assuming I'd picked up something greasy or old syrup I'd missed earlier. I lifted the mop out. Black water streamed from the fibers, dripping back into the bucket in slow, deliberate drops. Each one sent out a ripple that didn't fade the way it should have. The surface stayed disturbed, trembling faintly, as if reacting to my gaze. I leaned closer. That was when I heard it. At first, it sounded like the freezers shifting, the deep mechanical sigh they made when cycling. But the sound was higher, closer, threading itself through the hum. A soft murmur, layered and indistinct, like voices heard through a wall. I straightened, heart thudding. The sound stopped. The store settled back into its familiar noises. The buzz of lights, the hum of machines, the distant tick of the clock above the register. I waited, listening. Nothing. I exhaled slowly and told myself I was tired. Long shifts did that. Made your senses play tricks, stretched your thoughts thin. I dipped the mop again. The water surged upward, dark as oil, climbing the mop head faster than gravity allowed. The whispering returned, clearer this time. Not words exactly, but shapes of sound that brushed against meaning. Breath against my ear. Familiar cadences without language. I dropped the mop. It hit the tile with a wet slap, black water splashing outward. The droplets didn't scatter randomly. They crept, spreading across the floor in thin tendrils that traced the grout lines, pooling at my feet. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, voices rising and falling like a crowd just out of sight. "Hello," I said, my voice small in the open space. The word echoed wrong, stretched, as if the store delayed giving it back to me. In the reflection of the freezer doors, I saw myself standing rigid, face pale under the flickering lights. But my reflection didn't move when I shifted my weight. Stared straight ahead, mouth slightly open, listening. I backed away from the bucket. The whispers followed, swelling as I moved, receding when I stopped. They weren't random. They were reacting. A phrase surfaced, clearer than the rest, spoken in a voice I recognized. My own. I felt a chill crawl up my arms. The sound wasn't a recording. It was wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Flattened, hollow, like something repeating a memory without understanding it. The water in the bucket rippled again, the surface breaking into shapes that almost looked like faces before smoothing out. I remembered then a story the previous manager had told me during my first week. About the building settling oddly. About a sinkhole years ago, long before the store was built, filled in and paved over. "The ground here doesn't forget," he'd said, half laughing. I hadn't asked what he meant. The lights flickered hard, off on off, casting the store into stuttering snapshots. In the darkness between blinks, the whispers surged, urgent now, pressing in from all sides. Shadows stretched along the aisles, crawling up the shelves, pooling beneath the counter. I grabbed the bucket handle, intending to dump the water down the drain in the back. The handle burned cold against my palm. The water inside surged again, sloshing violently, slapping against the sides as if resisting. The whispers sharpened into something closer to speech. Stay. The word formed clearly, unmistakably, rising from the bucket and echoing through the store. I staggered back, the bucket tipping. Black water spilled across the tile, spreading faster than liquid should, flowing uphill toward the aisles. Images flickered in the water's surface. The store empty during the day, customers moving through in blurred streaks. The night shift, me behind the counter, staring at my phone. Older images, too, bare ground under moonlight, a dark depression in the earth, filled with rainwater that reflected nothing at all. The floor vibrated faintly, a low pulse that matched the whispering cadence. Time felt thick, resistant. I glanced at the clock. It hadn't moved. The whispers rose again, layered now with other voices. Fragments of conversations I half remembered. Things said and forgotten. Regrets I hadn't known I carried. The water crept closer, lapping at my shoes, cold seeping through the soles. "It's just water," I whispered, more plea than statement. The reflections in the freezer glass smiled when I didn't. I ran. I bolted for the back room, shoes splashing through the black sheen coating the floor. The whispers chased me, swelling into a chorus that filled my head. I slammed the door behind me and leaned against it, chest heaving, the smell of disinfectant sharp enough to sting my eyes. Silence. After a long moment, I opened the door a crack. The store looked normal. The floor was clean, dry. The bucket stood upright near the counter, filled with cloudy gray water. The mop leaned against the wall, dripping clear liquid onto the tile. I laughed, shaky and relieved, and stepped back out. As I grabbed the mop, I noticed something clinging to the fibers, dark, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right. It slid back into the bucket soundlessly, the surface dimpling in welcome. The whisper brushed my ear, gentle and patient. "Next time," it said. I froze, hands still on the mop handle, knowing with a certainty that hollowed me out. The water didn't want the floor. It wanted me to keep listening. A customer entered wearing a name tag that matched mine, but I'd never seen them before. The store was in its late-night state, the version of itself that only existed after midnight, when the aisles seemed longer and the lights forgot how to stay steady. The fluorescence flickered overhead, not enough to go dark, just enough to keep the shadows restless. The freezers hummed along the back wall in a low, patient tone that vibrated faintly through the tile. Every sound carried farther at night. The click of my pen against the counter, the soft rasp of my sleeve when I shifted my weight, the distant tick of the clock above the register. I was alone. I always was at this hour. The front windows reflected the store back at itself more clearly than the parking lot outside. Beyond the glass was only darkness and the faint glow of a single streetlight. Inside, the reflection duplicated every aisle, every shelf, creating the illusion that the store went on forever, looping into itself. I adjusted my name tag without thinking, the plastic warm from my body. It was scratched and clouded from months of use, the letters slightly faded but still readable. Seeing my own name grounded me. It reminded me I was real, that I belonged here at least for the length of the shift. That was when the door opened. There was no bell. There should have been. I'd fixed it myself after it stopped ringing one night, soldering the loose wire behind the frame. It hadn't failed since. But the door slid open silently, and a figure stepped inside. They moved slowly, deliberately, as if testing the floor with each step. The automatic door closed behind them, sealing out the night. The lights flickered once, hard enough to make my eyes ache. "Evening," I said out of habit. The customer didn't answer right away. They stood just inside the entrance, head tilted slightly, watching the store the way someone might watch an unfamiliar animal. The hum of the freezers deepened, dropping a half step in pitch. I felt it in my chest. They wore the same uniform I did, dark shirt, store logo over the left breast. The fabric hung on them differently, as if it had been tailored for a body that wasn't quite shaped like mine. When they finally turned toward the counter, I saw the name tag. My name. Same font. Same scratches along the edge. Even the clip was bent in the same place. For a moment, my brain refused to process it. I told myself it was a coincidence, that I was tired, that my eyes were playing tricks under the flickering lights. But as they walked down the first aisle, the shelves seemed to shift around them, making space. Their reflections slid along the freezer doors, lagging half a second behind their movements, just like mine sometimes did when I stared too long. "Can I help you?" I asked. They smiled faintly, like someone humoring a child. "You already are." Their voice sounded wrong. Not distorted, not inhuman, just too familiar. It carried the same cadence as my own speech, the same slight hesitation before certain words. Hearing it from someone else made my skin prickle. They stopped at the end of the aisle, fingers brushing the shelf. Cans rattled softly in response, settling only after they passed. The lights above that aisle flickered in a pattern I recognized. 3 short blinks, a pause, then 2 more. The same pattern that always happened when the power was about to surge, though it never actually did. "You're new," they said, glancing at me. "Relatively." "I've been here months," I replied. They nodded. That's what I said too. The clock above the register caught my eye. The second hand hovered between ticks, trembling but not moving. I watched it for a full breath. It stayed frozen. I stepped out from behind the counter, needing distance from the clock, from the reflection in the glass that now showed 2 clerks instead of 1. As I moved, the aisles seemed to shift, bending subtly, as if the store were reconfiguring itself around us. The distance between shelves felt wrong. Too close in some places, stretched thin in others. "Where did you get that uniform?" I asked. They looked down at themselves, then back at me. "From the back room. Same as you." "That's not. You don't remember?" Their tone was gentle, almost concerned. "It happens. The longer you stay, the more the store decides what to keep." The freezers clicked, then resumed their hum. I became acutely aware of the smell of the place. Cleaner, dust, old plastic, the faint sweetness of spilled soda ground into the grout. It all felt overwhelming, like my senses were turned up too high. "I've never seen you," I said. "And I'd remember." "Would you?" They took a step closer. I noticed then that they mirrored my movements unconsciously. When I shifted my weight, they did too. When I folded my arms, they followed a heartbeat later. A memory slipped away as I reached for it. I couldn't say what it had been, only that something was missing. "You work the late shift," they continued. "You close alone. You tell yourself you like the quiet." I swallowed. Those were things I'd never said out loud. The lights dimmed slightly, shadows stretching along the floor, crawling up the shelves. In the reflection of the freezer glass, I saw us standing side by side, indistinguishable except for position. For a flicker of time, I couldn't tell which one I was. "What do you want?" I asked. They looked genuinely puzzled. "To clock in." They reached into their pocket and pulled out a key. My key. The one I kept on a lanyard under my shirt. I touched my chest instinctively. The lanyard was gone. The clock above the register clicked. The second hand jumped forward, then froze again. "You're tired," they said softly. "You've been covering a lot of shifts. Someone has to take over eventually." "I'm not leaving," I said. They smiled wider this time. Neither did I. The store seemed to breathe in around us. The aisles narrowed, shelves inching closer. The hum of the freezers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts. In the glass, their reflection began to move on its own, stepping forward while the real them stayed still. "I'm the clerk," I said, forcing the words out. "This is my shift. My name." They leaned in, close enough that I could see the fine scratches on their name tag, identical to mine. "Then prove it." The lights went out. In the darkness, I felt a hand press the name tag against my chest. The plastic was cold, unfamiliar. When the lights flickered back on, the store was empty. The counter stood unattended. The aisles were still. The clock read 12 o'clock exactly. I looked down. The name tag clipped to my shirt bore a name I didn't recognize. Behind the counter, in the glass of the freezers, a clerk watched me with my face and my old name, waiting for the door to open.